Ajakaye, an 11-year-old boy with a mind as sharp as a blade, was always the talk of Iwo village. His reputation was far from ordinary. It was a curious mix of awe, frustration, and amusement. He was known for being notorious, famous in a way that made the elders shake their heads while the younger ones followed him with bright-eyed admiration. Ajakaye had an uncanny ability to stir trouble like no one else. His mischief was legendary, spreading through the village like wildfire, much like a band of wild monkeys causing chaos in a field. Whether he was setting harmless traps for the local hunters or convincing his friends to pull the silliest pranks on the marketplace traders, Ajakaye seemed to thrive on causing confusion. Yet beneath all that mayhem lay a boy with a brilliant, problem-solving mind. Despite his antics, there was one thing no one in the village could deny. When things got tough, Ajakaye always found a way to help, though his methods were often unconventional and unexpected. His pranks were the stuff of legends, but his solutions to problems were even more extraordinary. This time, however, the village of Iwo found itself in a crisis far too serious for any of Ajakaye's typical pranks. The stakes were much higher, and even those who would usually roll their eyes at his schemes now turned to him with a glimmer of hope. The crisis came early one morning, just as the first rays of the sun began to bathe the village in soft golden light. It had been a peaceful dawn, with the farmers already tending to their fields and the traders preparing their goods for the busy day ahead. But that peace was soon shattered when a group of messengers from the neighboring village, Isaken, stormed into Iwo, bringing with them a cloud of tension that hovered over the village like an impending storm. The leader of the Isaken delegation, a tall man with a stern expression, wasted no time in making his accusation. "Where are our livestock?" he bellowed, his voice loud enough to rattle the windows of the nearby huts. His eyes were locked on Obo Olusegun, the chief of Iwo, as though the entire village's guilt rested solely on the chief's shoulders. Behind the leader stood several other men, all dressed in the traditional Isaken attire, their faces equally grim. The weight of their presence sent ripples of unease through the air. Oba Olusegun, a wise and dignified man, stood up from his seat under the village's ancient baobab tree, his expression one of deep concern. His brow furrowed, and his strong hands tightened around the staff of authority that symbolized his role as the chief of Iwo. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating, as if the very atmosphere itself was holding its breath, waiting for the chief's response. "Livestock stolen?" Oba Olusegun echoed slowly, as though trying to absorb the gravity of the accusation. He glanced around at his people, who were gathered in small clusters, whispering among themselves. Many of them had stopped their morning tasks to listen to the unfolding drama. "There must be some mistake," the chief said, though his voice carried a tone of uncertainty. The accusation had clearly shaken him, and it was easy to see why. "Someone from your village has stolen our goats and chickens," the Isaken leader continued, his words sharp and filled with conviction. "Several of them disappeared overnight, and we have reason to believe someone from Iwo is responsible. We demand justice. If you do not return our livestock, there will be consequences, dire consequences." His voice dropped ominously, sending a shiver through the crowd. The words, "dire consequences," hung in the air like a blade poised to strike. The people of Iwo gasped in disbelief, their shock echoing through the gathering. It was as if the ground had shifted beneath their feet. To be accused of theft was not only a blow to their pride, but also a threat to the fragile peace that existed between the two neighboring communities. Iwo prided itself on its honesty, its integrity, and its reputation as a village that respected its neighbors. For years, the people had lived by a code of trust and cooperation, ensuring that no disputes ever escalated into full-blown conflicts. And yet, here they were, facing accusations of dishonesty and theft. How could it be? The villagers exchanged nervous glances, their hearts pounding with uncertainty. Some muttered under their breath, while others stood frozen in place, their eyes darting between their chief and the messengers from Ajakaye. The tension was almost palpable, as if one wrong word could spark a conflict that would tear apart the harmony they had worked so hard to maintain. Oba Olusegun stood in the center of it all, his gaze shifting between his own people and the delegation from Ajakaye. He knew that if this situation was not handled carefully, it could lead to something far worse than the loss of livestock. A misunderstanding like this had the potential to escalate into violence, or worse, a full-blown war between the villages. The chief took a deep breath, his mind racing as he tried to think of a way to resolve the situation without further inflaming tensions. Oba Olusegun, the highly respected chief of Iwo, knew the gravity of the situation. He quickly had gathered his most trusted elders under the shade of the ancient baobab tree, its thick, gnarled branches offering a small semblance of comfort as the crisis loomed over them. The elders were seated in a semicircle, their faces etched with concern, their brows furrowed deeply in thought. The village had never faced such a direct accusation from Ajakaye, and no one had the courage to deny the gravity of the threat. Ajakaye, the neighboring village, was much larger and notorious for its aggressive responses. A confrontation with them was the last thing Iwo wanted. Oba Olusegun sat in silence, his fingers gently stroking his graying beard. His mind was racing, trying to find a solution that would prevent conflict and clear the village's name. The theft of livestock, goats and chickens, might seem trivial, but to the people of Ajakaye, it was a matter of honor and survival. Livestock wasn't just food. It was wealth, a measure of status, and vital for the rituals that kept their traditions alive. To be accused of theft was to be labeled as dishonorable, a stain that could never be erased. Just as Oba Olusegun was about to speak, offering words of reassurance or perhaps suggesting an investigation, a voice rang out from the back of the crowd. "Let me handle this." It was a voice that everyone in the village recognized instantly. Ajakaye's voice, full of mischief and confidence. "Chief, let me handle this." The crowd turned in unison, eyes widening as they saw Ajakaye stepping forward. His grin was as wide as the horizon, his eyes sparkling with the mischievous energy that everyone in Iwo had come to recognize. A ripple of murmurs passed through the villagers gathered nearby, many of them whispering among themselves as they wondered what Ajakaye could possibly be thinking. Ajakaye, standing tall for his 11 years, had always been a peculiar blend of trouble and genius. His reputation was known far and wide, and while the elders often scolded him for his pranks, there was no denying his brilliance. He had an extraordinary way of seeing the world, finding solutions to problems that would stump even the most experienced adults. Though his pranks caused endless frustration, Ajakaye's ability to solve problems in the strangest of ways had saved the village more than once. The elders, usually a strict and serious group, found themselves quieting down the moment Ajakaye spoke. They knew better than to dismiss him outright, especially in a time of crisis. Ajakaye had a reputation, yes, but he also had a knack for solving the impossible. The only problem was that his methods, well, they weren't exactly normal. Oba Olusegun's face immediately darkened with suspicion as Ajakaye approached. The chief's sharp eyes narrowed as he assessed the boy. He had dealt with Ajakaye many times before, and while he couldn't deny the boy's intelligence, he wasn't about to let him turn this serious matter into a game. "Ajakaye," the chief began, his voice low and stern, "this is no time for your jokes. This is a serious matter, and the whole village's reputation is at stake." The weight of Oba Olusegun's words hung heavy in the air. The villagers nodded in agreement, their faces a mixture of fear and anxiety. No one doubted the severity of the situation. The threat from Isaacin wasn't idle. The neighboring village had a history of responding to such accusations with force, and Iwo was in no position to withstand an attack. The tension between the two villages had always been fragile, and now it seemed on the brink of shattering. But Ajakaye, undeterred by the chief's stern warning, kept his grin intact. His eyes gleamed with a confidence that both puzzled and intrigued those around him. To everyone else, the situation looked dire, but to Ajakaye, it was just another problem waiting to be solved. His young mind, sharp and endlessly creative, was already piecing together a plan that only he could fathom. "Chief," Ajakaye began again, more seriously this time, but still with that unmistakable spark of mischief. "I'm not joking. I can solve this. Give me 7 days and I'll bring back the livestock, or at least show you who really took them." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to react. 7 days? It seemed both too long and too short. What could Ajakaye possibly do in 7 days that the entire village couldn't figure out together? But can it be 3 days? Oba Olusegun crossed his arms, still skeptical. He didn't doubt Ajakaye's intelligence, but this was a matter of diplomacy and survival. Could he really trust the boy with such an important task? "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" the chief asked, his tone edged with doubt. Ajakaye's grin only widened as he responded, "Just trust me, Chief. You've seen me handle bigger problems before, haven't you? I will try my best within 3 days, but if it passes 3 days, it will not be more than 7 days." The crowd fell silent, and though many were skeptical, they couldn't help but remember the times when Ajakaye had pulled them out of tricky situations in the past. Whether it was finding a lost child in the forest by using an elaborate system of clues, or helping resolve a trade dispute by tricking both parties into realizing they needed each other, Ajakaye's methods, though strange, had a way of working. Oba Olusegun let out a long, heavy sigh. He glanced at his elders, who remained silent, their faces a mix of concern and reluctant hope. Finally, the chief nodded, though his expression remained serious. "Very well, Ajakaye. 7 days. But understand this. If you fail, there will be consequences not only for you but for the entire village. Isaacin will not wait forever." Ajakaye's face lit up even brighter, his confidence seemingly unshakable. "You won't regret it, Chief. I'll have your answer in 7 days or less." The chiefs of Isaacin narrowed his eyes, but nodded reluctantly. He had heard of Ajakaye's odd genius, though he didn't quite trust it. "You have 3 days, not 7 days, boy. If you fail, we'll settle this the hard way." "I heard you, Chief." Ajakaye smiled, his eyes twinkling with mischief and determination. 3 days, as you said, should be all I needed." The weight of the task now rested squarely on Ajakaye's shoulders. The villagers whispered anxiously among themselves. Could Ajakaye really pull this off? The village had seen him work miracles before, but this time the stakes were higher than ever. Ajakaye set off immediately, wasting no time as he gathered his closest friends, partners in crime for most of his mischievous schemes and pranks. There was Toby, the lanky boy with a quick wit, Ade, whose strength was unmatched, and Kemi, the sharp-eyed girl who could spot a missing grain of sand in a storm, and 3 others. These were the people Ajakaye trusted most, not because they were the best behaved, but because they understood him, and they had the same knack for turning chaos into opportunity. They were the friends that followed him into the Forbidden Forest to discover the green shining stone that popularized Iwo village till today. As soon as Ajakaye laid out the situation, they didn't question him, though their faces were a mix of curiosity and caution. They had all heard about the missing livestock, the accusations from Isaacin, and the simmering threat of conflict between the villages. This wasn't a typical prank or minor misunderstanding. This was serious. But their loyalty to Ajakaye outweighed any fears. If anyone could solve this mystery, it was him. Together, they ventured toward the outskirts of Iwo, where the stolen livestock had last been seen grazing before they vanished into the night. The open fields stretched far beyond what the eye could see, the grass swaying in the gentle breeze as if nothing unusual had happened. But Ajakaye's sharp eyes scanned the ground with the intensity of a hawk hunting its prey. Something was off. As they walked across the field, Ajakaye's friends began to feel uneasy. The grass was trampled, but not in the way it would have been if humans had taken the animals. Instead of clear footprints, there were strange, uneven markings.
I hope you are enjoying the story. Please, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so that you will be notified anytime I upload new video. Now let's continue the story.
The earth was disturbed as though something heavy had moved through the area, something with no clear direction. Toby, ever the skeptic, crouched down to inspect the ground, scratching his head in confusion. Ajakaye, this doesn't look like people took these animals. There's no pattern, no sign of footprints, nothing. Ade chimed in. Yeah, it's like something big just rolled through here, but what? Kemi, her sharp eyes darting around, spotted what looked like claw marks along the edges of field. Look over there, she pointed. Those aren't human tracks. A sinking realization began to settle over them. Could wild animals have taken livestock? It didn't seem possible. Goats and chickens might wander off, but sheep? Something more significant, something more dangerous, had to be responsible. But how could they explain this to Isaac's chief without solid proof? Wild animals couldn't testify, and without clear evidence it would be their word against Isaac's, and that wasn't a risk they could take. Ajakaye, however, was unfazed by their growing doubts. His mind was already racing through possibilities, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth as he calculated his next move. He had seen enough to confirm his suspicion, but now he needed to prove it. A plan was forming, something ridiculous, risky, and almost certainly crazy, but that was what Ajakaye did best. As his friends exchanged uneasy glances, Toby voiced what everyone was thinking. Is he going to do something crazy again? Kemi folded her arms, shaking her head. Probably. Ade, who had been with Ajakaye through some of his most harebrained schemes, sighed deeply. What if he makes things worse? But Ajakaye paid no attention to their murmurs. His focus was entirely on the ground, studying every detail. Then, in the middle of his examination, he suddenly straightened up, eyes wide with mock revelation. With dramatic flair, he bent down to inspect something small and unassuming near his feet. Aha! Ajakaye's voice rang out, startling the group. He crouched down, pointing at a pile of goat dung, as though he had just discovered the crown jewels. This, he announced grandly, is definitely goat poop, but it came out with force. His friends stared at him, their expressions shifting between disbelief and confusion. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Toby raised an eyebrow, Kemi pinched the bridge of her nose, and Ade looked like he was trying not to laugh. Ajakaye, Toby finally ventured. What are you talking about? Ajakaye stood up straight, a smirk dancing on his lips. Look at the shape, the texture. This goat was running fast, and not just running, it was being chased by something. Wild animals, no doubt. There was a pause as the others processed his logic. Ajakaye's face was the picture of exaggerated seriousness, his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of someone who had just solved an ancient riddle. His friends, on the other hand, were less convinced. They exchanged baffled glances, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or just walk away. Kemi shook her head, incredulous. Goat poop with force? Ajakaye, are you serious? But Ajakaye didn't flinch. He was used to his friends doubting him at first. In fact, it was all part of the fun. His grin widened as he continued. "Of course, I'm serious. Think about it. The goats were being chased by something big, something fast. The tracks, the marks, and now the poop, it all fits. We're dealing with wild animals here, not thieves." Ade, still trying to suppress his laughter, finally spoke up. "Okay, let's say you're right. How do we catch these wild animals? We can't just show Isaacin some goat poop and expect them to believe us." Ajakaye's smile grew even wider, a mischievous twinkle lighting up his eyes. "Oh, don't worry about that. I have a plan, and it involves a lot more than goat poop." His friends groaned in unison, knowing full well that whatever plan Ajakaye had in mind would be anything but normal. They braced themselves for whatever madness he was about to unleash. Ajakaye's friends squinted hard at the patch of dirt before them, hoping to catch some glimmer of insight in the mess of tracks and dung. To them, it just looked like ordinary ground, trampled and muddied. But Ajakaye, he saw something no one else could. He crouched low, staring intently, as if the earth was whispering secrets into his ears. His confidence was palpable, even if his conclusions were still as baffling to the others as ever. "This is the work of wild animals," Ajakaye declared, his voice firm with conviction. "Not thieves. These tracks are too erratic, too chaotic to be made by humans." His finger traced the uneven patterns in the dirt, showing them exactly what he saw. The others nodded along, still not fully understanding. But they knew better than to question Ajakaye when he was in his element. "But how do we prove it?" Toby asked, frowning. "The people of Isaacin won't just take our word for it." Ajakaye's eyes sparkled mischievously. "We need proof. Proof that even Isaacin can't deny." He stood up suddenly, the cogs in his mind already turning. His friends leaned in, expecting him to suggest something wild, because that's what Ajakaye always did. He never played by the rules. "We need to find these animals," he said, pacing back and forth, his mind racing faster than his feet. "But we won't chase them. No, that would take forever, and these animals are too smart for that." He grinned, a grin that always preceded one of his outlandish schemes. "We'll make them come to us?" His friends blinked, exchanging cautious glances. "Come to us?" Kemi repeated, raising an eyebrow. "How exactly do you plan on getting wild animals to just walk into our arms?" Ajakaye's grin widened. "Simple," he said, rubbing his hands together. "We set a trap." "A trap?" Ade's eyebrows shot up. "For wild animals?" "Ajakaye, we're not talking about catching rabbits here." "No," Ajakaye agreed. "We're not. But this isn't going to be any ordinary trap." His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "This is going to be something far more interesting." And when Ajakaye said interesting, his friends knew to brace themselves for the unexpected. His traps, his schemes, and his plans were never straightforward. In fact, they were usually borderline absurd, but somehow they always worked, and that was exactly what kept everyone following him, despite the chaos that usually followed. "We need to capture one of these wild animals," Ajakaye continued, pacing again as his brain worked out the details. "But not just any animal." He stopped dramatically, turning to face his friends, eyes gleaming with excitement. "We need to catch the ringleader." "The ringleader?" Toby asked, completely lost. "Yes," Ajakaye said, waving a hand as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "The ringleader, the boss, the head honcho of these wild creatures, the one that's been orchestrating all the attacks on our livestock." Kemi crossed her arms, staring at Ajakaye skeptically. "And how exactly do you know there's a ringleader?" Ajakaye shrugged nonchalantly. "You always need to catch the biggest, baddest one. That's how you solve the problem at the root." His friends still looked unconvinced, but Ajakaye was undeterred. He wasn't about to let a little thing like logic get in the way of his plan. Wild animals, especially large predators, were clever, cunning, and notoriously difficult to catch. But Ajakaye was cleverer. He spent the rest of that day sitting by the village's largest tree, sketching out his elaborate plan in the dirt, while his friends stood by, half impressed and half bewildered. They had seen some of Ajakaye's strange ideas before, but this one was on another level entirely. "I've got it," Ajakaye announced finally, standing up with a clap of his hands. His friends jumped at the sound, startled from their thoughts. "Okay," Ade said slowly. "What's the plan?" Ajakaye grinned. That infamous grin that signaled something spectacularly bizarre was about to unfold. "We're going to need a few things." And when Ajakaye said a few things, it never meant the typical tools or materials one might expect for a hunting expedition. No, Ajakaye's mind worked differently. He instructed his friends to gather the most random assortment of items imaginable. An oversized fishing net, the kind used for pulling fish out of large rivers, a bundle of squeaky goat toys, ones that made high-pitched noises that no one could quite tolerate for long, several gourds of palm wine, because no plan of Ajakaye's was complete without some palm wine, and as the piece de resistance, a large pile of yams. "Yams?" Kemi asked, her confusion reaching new heights. "What are the yams for?" Ajakaye's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Oh, you'll see." His friends exchanged baffled glances, clearly unsure whether Ajakaye had finally lost his mind. But knowing Ajakaye's strange ways, they complied. After all, no one could deny that his unorthodox methods had a strange tendency to work out in the end, sometimes in ways that no one could have predicted. By sunset, they had gathered all the items. The fishing net was laid out, stretching across the clearing like a massive spider's web. The goat toys squeaked in the distance, their grating sounds echoing through the quiet air, and the pile of yams sat ominously in the middle of it all. "This is going to work?" Ade asked doubtfully, staring at the chaotic setup. "Oh, it'll work," Ajakaye said confidently, tying off the last corner of the net. "You just wait." The trap was set, and now all they had to do was wait. Ajakaye's friends settled into the bushes around the clearing, watching nervously as night began to fall. If Ajakaye was right, the wild animals would come, drawn to the strange combination of scents and sounds that only he could have concocted. The night air was thick with tension. The squeaking of the toys continued, an odd, eerie sound that somehow blended with the chirping of crickets, and then faint rustling in the distance. Ajakaye's grin grew wider. "Here they come," he whispered. His friends held their breath as the rustling grew louder. Something was moving through the tall grass, drawn by the yams, the squeaky toys, and perhaps the sheer oddity of the whole situation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of deep oranges and purples, Ajakaye and his friends worked quickly to set up the trap. The air was still and thick with anticipation. Ajakaye, ever the mastermind of mischief, carefully placed the squeaky goat toys in a perfect circle, ensuring that they surrounded the bait, an enticing pile of yams soaked in palm wine. He chuckled to himself as he drenched the area, using more palm wine than any sane person would for such a purpose. "This will definitely work," Ajakaye muttered, his eyes twinkling with excitement. His hands rubbed together in glee, his mind already picturing the wild animals' reactions. There's no way the ringleader can resist this kind of feast. Yams, wine, and a chorus of squeaks? It's the perfect trap. His friends, though still confused by the plan, could sense Ajakaye's unshakable confidence. They'd seen his scheme succeed before, albeit through the strangest of methods. So they followed his lead, albeit with raised eyebrows and stifled snickers. As night fell, and the sky turned inky black, they crouched behind bushes a little way off, keeping their eyes glued to the trap. Hours passed. The village of Iwo fell silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or chirp of crickets. The moonlight bathed the trap in an eerie silver glow, but no wild animals appeared. Slowly, one by one, Ajakaye's friends began to nod off, the calm of the night lulling them into a drowsy haze. Even the squeaky toys, which had seemed absurdly loud in the day, blended into the background now. But not Ajakaye. No, he remained wide awake, his body buzzing with anticipation. His eyes darted to every shadow, every flicker of movement, ready for the moment his trap would spring to life. He leaned forward, his fingers gripping the dirt beneath him, as if he could somehow will the wild animals into appearing. Just as his friends had begun snoring softly, a faint sound emerged from the nearby bushes. A rustling, barely noticeable at first, but growing louder. Ajakaye's ears perked up instantly. His heart raced with excitement. He nudged Toby, who jolted awake, his eyes wide and groggy. "Shoo!" Ajakaye whispered, holding up a hand. "Something's coming." His friends quickly shook themselves awake, eyes darting toward the bushes. The rustling grew louder, and then out of the shadows, a scruffy, wild dog emerged. The creature looked haggard, its fur matted, and its eyes glinted with hunger. Its nose twitched furiously as it caught the scent of the yams and palm wine, and its ears perked up at the unfamiliar but tantalizing aroma. The wild dog hesitated at the edge of the clearing, sniffing the air and eyeing the circle of toys warily. Ajakaye clapped his hand over his mouth, trying desperately to suppress a laugh. His friends held their breath, afraid to make the slightest sound that might spook the animal. The wild dog took another cautious step forward, and then another, its stomach clearly driving it toward the bait. Its eyes never left the yams as it gingerly padded into the circle of squeaky goat toys. And then it happened. Squeak, squeak, squeak.
I hope you are enjoying the story. Please, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so that you will be notified anytime I upload new video. Now let's continue the story.
The toys went off like a chorus of tiny, high-pitched explosions. The wild dog jumped a foot into the air, startled beyond belief. Its fur stood on end as it spun around in circles, trying to figure out where the noises were coming from. The squeaks continued, echoing through the clearing in chaotic harmony, bouncing off the trees and filling the air with an absurd, cacophonous racket. The wild dog let out a startled yelp, its confusion only growing as it stepped on more toys, each one setting off another round of squeaks. Every direction it turned, another toy squeaked underfoot, as if the ground itself were alive and laughing at it. The more it tried to escape, the more toys it activated, sending the poor animal into a frenzied dance of terror. By now, Ajakaye was shaking with barely contained laughter, tears streaming down his face. His friends were no better off, clutching their stomachs as they tried and failed to stifle their giggles. The wild dog's chaotic dance continued, its once hungry eyes now wide with panic. It was as though it had stumbled into some twisted prank orchestrated by a trickster spirit. The noise of the toys only grew louder as the dog frantically tried to flee, but every step it took brought it closer to more squeaks. It was a ridiculous sight, an animal so fierce, reduced to a bumbling mess by a handful of squeaky toys. The scene was too much for Ajakaye and his friends, who finally let their laughter erupt, echoing through the night louder than the squeaks themselves. The wild dog, now thoroughly spooked, finally made a break for it. It dashed out of the circle, its legs a blur, as it disappeared into the bushes, leaving behind a scene of absolute chaos. Toys lay scattered everywhere, still squeaking in the aftermath, and the yams sat untouched in the middle of the clearing, their smell mingling with the sweet scent of palm wine. For a few moments, The group sat in stunned silence, trying to catch their breath from laughing so hard. Ajakaye wiped the tears from his face, grinning from ear to ear. "Well," he said between gasps of laughter, "that was something." Toby, still wheezing from laughing so hard, looked at Ajakaye in disbelief. "I can't believe that worked," he said, shaking his head. Ajakaye stood up, brushing the dirt off his knees. "Oh, it worked all right. We got our proof now. No way that Wild Dog was acting alone. There's more of them out there, and they've been snatching our livestock. But how are we going to explain this to the Isaacin people?" Kemi asked, still giggling but looking slightly worried. "They won't believe us if we just tell them a wild dog danced on squeaky toys." Ajakaye grinned, the mischievous glint returning to his eyes. "Oh, don't worry about that," he said confidently. "We've still got a few days left, and by the time I'm done, Isaacin will have no choice but to believe us." The scene was pure chaos, but to Ajakaye and his friends, it was a perfection. As the poor wild dog leaped and spun around, looking as if it were performing some frantic, feverish dance on hot coals, his friends clutched their sides, doubled over with laughter. Their giggles echoed through the clearing, filling the night air as tears streamed down their faces. It was a sight so absurd that even the normally composed Toby was wheezing with laughter. Just as the wild dog made a desperate leap onto the pile of yams, there came a loud twang. Ajakaye's trap had sprung into action. From above, the oversized fishing net fell like a giant spider's web, draping over the confused creature. The wild dog was trapped, utterly tangled in the net. It let out a series of frantic howls, rolling on the ground in a helpless attempt to free itself. The more it struggled, the more ensnared it became, its legs kicking in all directions. The rest of the wild pack, startled by the commotion and the strange human laughter, darted back into the bushes, their eyes wide with fear. They would never come near Iwo again, that much was certain. Ajakaye stood up from his hiding spot, a wide grin spreading across his face as he looked at his handiwork. His friends, still shaking with laughter, watched as he placed his hands triumphantly on his hips. "Behold, the ringleader of the wild animals," he announced grandly, as if presenting the spoils of a great hunt. His voice was filled with exaggerated pride, making his friends laugh even harder. The wild dog, however, was far from proud. It let out one last pitiful howl before giving up entirely, collapsing into a pile of yams and squeaky toys, utterly defeated. The net had tangled around its legs, making any further escape attempts impossible. It lay there, breathing heavily, its head resting on a yam as though it had accepted its fate. Early the next morning, with the first light of dawn creeping over the horizon, Ajakaye's friends and a group of curious villagers gathered to march toward Isaacin. Ajakaye, always dramatic, led the procession, proudly dragging the scruffy wild dog behind him. The poor animal was still entangled in the fishing net, its once defiant spirit now completely broken. Every few steps, it would let out a small, pitiful bark, as though lamenting the absurdity of its capture. The villagers of Iwo followed behind, some laughing softly, others whispering about how they had never seen such a strange sight. Children skipped alongside the group, trying to poke at the wild dog's fur, only to be shooed away by the elders. It was a spectacle unlike anything the village had ever seen, and it was all orchestrated by the mischievous mind of Ajakaye. As they approached the gates of Isaacin, the villagers of the neighboring town gathered to see what all the commotion was about. The chief of Isaacin, a tall and stern man with a face as weathered as old leather, stood with his arms crossed, his expression skeptical. His eyes narrowed as he took in the sight before him. Ajakaye dragging a miserable, tangled wild dog through the dirt. What is the meaning of this? The chief demanded, his voice booming with authority. Before Ajakaye could respond, one of Iwo's elders, a man known for his booming laugh and sharp wit, stepped forward with a wide grin. "Chief," he said, bowing respectfully, "I present to you the culprit behind the missing livestock." He gestured toward the wild dog, which let out another pitiful bark, its tail drooping. This wild dog and its pack have been raiding both our villages. The chief of Ajakaye stared at the wild dog for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The crowd waited with bated breath, unsure of what would happen next. But then, a sound broke the tension, an unexpected sound, deep and rumbling. The chief of Ajakaye was laughing. His laughter started as a low chuckle, but soon it grew into a booming roar, shaking his entire body. It was as if the absurdity of the situation had finally hit him. Here was this wild, scruffy dog, tied up in a fishing net, surrounded by squeaky toys and yams, being presented as some kind of notorious criminal. The image was too much for him to handle, and soon his laughter became contagious. The entire crowd, both from Iwo and Ajakaye, erupted in laughter, their voices mingling with the morning bird song. People doubled over, clutching their bellies as the wild dog sat in the dirt, bewildered by the chaos it had caused. Even the wild dog, perhaps sensing the absurdity of it all, let out a confused bark. It turned its head from side to side, as if trying to figure out why these humans were laughing so loudly. The sound only made the crowd laugh harder. Tears streamed down their faces, and the once tense situation dissolved into a moment of shared hilarity. "You mean to tell me," the chief wheezed between laughs, "that this mangy creature has been stealing our livestock?" The chief of Ajakaye wiped a tear from his eye, still chuckling. "Well," he said, catching his breath, "I suppose this proves Iwo is not to blame. You've certainly brought me the culprit." He slapped Ajakaye on the back, his tone now warm and full of amusement. "You've outdone yourself, boy. It takes a sharp mind to solve a problem like this." Ajakaye beamed with pride, though there was a twinkle of mischief in his eye. "Thank you, Chief," he said, bowing slightly. "I told you we'd find the real culprits, and now peace between our villages can be restored." Ajakaye nodded seriously. "Yes, but don't be fooled by its appearance. This one is the mastermind. We caught it in the act with our special squeaky trap." The chief of Ajakaye wiped tears from his eyes, still chuckling. "Well, I can't argue with that. You've proven your point, boy. It seems we were wrong to accuse Iwo of theft. The Iwo gangs and some selected messengers from Ajakaye went to the scene where the wild dog was captured to further cement their claims. As Ajakaye and his friends returned home, the villagers of Iwo cheered for their hero. Though his methods were unconventional, Ajakaye had once again proven that his sharp mind and creative solutions could save the day. Ajakaye and his team were hailed as heroes. But it wasn't just their cleverness that earned them respect. It was their ability to turn a tense situation into one that had both villages laughing together. Even Oba Olusegun, who had doubted Ajakaye at first, couldn't help but crack a smile. "You've done it again, Ajakaye," the chief said, patting him on the back. "Oba, it's not only me. All my friends were involved. We did it together. But next time, please, try not to involve squeaky goat toys. I was told of the naughtiness of the trap." Ajakaye nodded. Ajakaye winked. "No promises, Chief. Sometimes laughter is the best solution to a problem." From that day on, Ajakaye's reputation grew even more complex. Yes, he was still the village prankster, always coming up with wild and ridiculous ideas. But now, even the neighboring villages knew that when it came to solving problems, Ajakaye's strange methods were not only effective, but also hilarious. Ajakaye's reputation in Iwo shifted. He was no longer just the mischievous prankster who caused chaos for fun. Now he was also the village's protector, someone they could turn to in times of trouble. His actions that day cemented his status as a man of wisdom, strength, and resourcefulness. Though his life would continue to be filled with pranks and tricks, Ajakaye had shown the world that there was more to him than mischief. Behind his playful demeanor was a mind as sharp as a blade, a heart filled with courage, and a spirit willing to do whatever it took to protect his people. Whenever a crisis hit Iwo, whether it was missing livestock, a broken bridge, or a mysterious disappearance, the villagers would always say with a grin, "Let's call Ajakaye. He'll figure it out. And we'll probably get a good laugh out of it too." As for Ajakaye, he continued to tackle every challenge that came his way with his signature combination of wit, humor, and a little bit of chaos. After all, what's life without a bit of fun?
Thanks for watching today's story. I believe you enjoyed every bit of it all. Now I want you to do me one favor, subscribe to this channel, like and turn on the notification bell if you have not done so that whenever I release my next video, you will be notified immediately. See you soon.